Welcome to Tech Startup Stories, hosted by Natalie Binns. This is the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the B2B startup world.
Hi, I'm Natalie Binns, and after many years as a marketing leader in the B2B SaaS industry, I set up Hey Gabby to support startups and scale-ups with their go-to-market and growth needs. I work with so many great founders, and that's led me to want to hear their stories and share them with others. And that's why I set up this podcast. So let's get into this week's podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's podcast. This week, I'm speaking with Kevin Callahan, who is the founder and CEO of Uniblock. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Likewise. So I was taking a bit of a read of your LinkedIn profile, and it seems that you are a serial entrepreneur. This is not your first rodeo. You seem to have done lots of different types of businesses. And I guess I really want to understand, has it always been in your mind to build a business, and where does that come from?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. And I can tell you the exact moment was when I was maybe 17 years old, and I had a boss who was a dick at a grocery store. And I realized at that point that I never wanted to be in a situation where somebody would have that kind of control over me. That, I think, combined with having a couple of family members that were pretty entrepreneurial. And, that's been something that I've wanted to do my entire life. I did also do my degree in entrepreneurship. So it's kind of followed me through my career.
Brilliant. I can imagine that's one way of spurring you on to run your own business. So how did you get started? What was the first business idea that you came up with?
Oh, I did lots of things. So I had, car reseller companies. I had clothing companies. I had websites galore. So I think there was always little things I was trying to do. A lot of failed attempts, I would say, at entrepreneurship, and that every time you fail, you learn something. But on top of that, I've had the opportunity to also work in some larger companies for better or for worse.
And when do you think you shifted into, okay, this is a serious business? This, I've started something and I think I can kind of make this work and move forward with it for a longer period of time?
So I think I've had the glimmer of that on a previous company. That previous company ended up being acquired. It was like a nice base hit. It wasn't like a huge exit, but that it felt like we were close. However, there was kind of insurmountable challenges that just at the time I wasn't equipped to be able to solve. I think if I went back in time, now having all these other, experiences, I could probably figure it out. But with the current business, I think there's a couple things. One was, we actually started to get funded. So in total, we've raised about $7.5 million. I think that's like one kind of, feather in our cap for it being kind of legitimate shot. And two, we actually have, a fairly large staff at this point. So people are counting on us, counting on me. And so it felt very real. It wasn't just, me kind of sitting in my basement. It was like us kind of on this mission. And so, yeah. And actually one other thing I'd say, Natalie, is that you look at other people and it's like, oh, you've got this, successful business. And then you have to remind yourself, oh, wait a minute, I do too. I just have to make it successful. It's not quite there yet. So it's kind of funny in that regard.
And what would you consider would be the time or the milestone where you can go, yes, I'm running a successful business?
So I don't know, and maybe I misspoke. I don't know if I would say we're successful ever. We're always, battling and working. I would say from the outside looking in, we would probably have that sheen of success at least. I think for us, we have a very high bar to what that means. But we definitely have, a business where, again, we've raised money. We have real customers paying us real money. We have, partnerships and a team. So yeah, I feel like we've kind of hit that at some point. And I don't really know when that actual inflection point was, but clearly we are at least a going concern, so to speak.
Brilliant. So where did you get your ideas from for Uniblock? Was that a collaborative thing with your co-founder? How did it come about?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem we were trying to solve has always kind of stayed the same, and how we solve it evolves as you get more information. But the problem we were always trying to solve was to make certain that, crypto and fintech, blockchain, had a very strong tech stack. And so that was the problem we were trying to solve. And so, again, like the how has changed and evolved as we go, but the what has kind of been the idea from the beginning. And I think we were inspired by kind of other business models and people that are solving this in other spaces and kind of brought that into kind of this like blockchain lens.
So, for those people listening to the show, how do you describe what Uniblock does? What would you sort of say in your elevator pitch?
So we sit on top of 50 different partners that create data streams that we have created a unified API from. So customers use us and they get access to all the best tools in crypto and blockchain.
Amazing. And where did the interest come from? How did you guys decide that this was the problem that you were going to try and solve?
So in the past, we had been doing some dev work on the side, and so that was one kind of influence on us. And then also previous to that, I was at Coinbase, so was able to see from the inside, some of the challenges that we were facing and other people in the ecosystem were facing. So I think there were kind of like multiple kind of aha moments across our lives, and so that and the opportunity to kind of start a company all kind of came together.
And is this the first time you've entered into a co-founder partnership?
Yeah, I'll go with yes. This is probably the first time that, I've actually had a co-founder and we've kind of taken it very seriously. A lot of people will have a co-founder and it kind of doesn't go anywhere. And I'm sure that's probably happened over my, many years of trying to figure something out. But this is kind of the first time that there's a co-founder and we're actually, doing things that are scaling.
And how does it work between you two? What are you doing in terms of responsibilities and ownership?
So David is our CTO and I am the CEO. And the idea is that, that is a kind of a nice delineation between the work generally. So if we're doing things that are, business or sales, generally that'd be my world, fundraising another one, and anything tech related. So it's not always as clean, but because we come from very different come in with different skill sets, it's a little bit easier than if you have like two business people or two, tech people.
Excellent. And how did you guys meet? And what was the kind of catalyst that made you both go, do you know what? We're going to have a go and do this together.
So we had mutual friends and, we met through the mutual friends and kind of talked for many months about kind of working together. And even did I think there's like a YC, I'm pretty sure it's YC, kind of like date your co-founder test. So yeah, I met a few times and it just, I guess when I was debating when to start a company, what to start, it was, do you have the right people? So the answer was, yes. Do you have the right problem, something you're willing to work on and fail at for a while? The answer was yes. And then are you in like a financial and, mental and, familiar kind of like place where you can kind of do this? And the answer was like, yes, although we can go back to that. And so a number of things aligned, the stars aligned for us to kind of go on this mission.
Amazing. How would you describe the learnings in your relationship in the sort of four years you've been working together?
I think that, I think there's something like, and don't quote me on the number, I'm sure AI can pull up in a moment, but something like 70% of startups that fail are failures because of the co-founder like fallout. And I think that is very true. I think that, making sure it's a person that you can work with, I think is very valuable. I think like, obviously being fair is very important. I think communication is very important, trust. So it's a lot like a marriage in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, I think that it's a constant learning opportunity. But generally, we're also very lucky. David and I get along well, and it seems to work for us. But I definitely know a lot of partnerships that kind of fall apart because there was just that wasn't there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that you spent time sort of working for Twitter. I'm just never going to call it X. I'm sorry, but I just can't get my head around that. And you've worked for other companies. You mentioned Coinbase. What was your main reason for, going from running a business to going back into, the corporate world and continuing on with that? Rather than perhaps, setting up a business and trying it again and doing something else.
Yeah, I think there's a few things. One, working at a company like Twitter is great, right? Like you get paid well, you have this like prestigious job, uh, and it's a good company. The reality is people that work at Meta or like Google or insert your favorite company have a good life, and so sometimes it's hard to kind of pull away from that. But I think also fundamentally, I had hit a point in my life where I, wanted to get married and I wanted to, do things. And so sometimes when you are an entrepreneur, it's almost impossible to do some of these things. It was hard for me to get a mortgage when I was an entrepreneur. It was hard for me to get a car loan, and so I think sometimes we romanticize startups which is fine as long as we also appreciate the tough times. And so when you are, starting a family, getting paid a nice paycheck is really great. So I think part of it is your point in your life, which I kind of alluded to earlier, where I said something you're willing to work on, the people you're willing to work on it with, and then, financially, mentally being in a good spot. Yeah, I don't think those three things lined up when I was, working in industry.
That totally makes sense. But now you are building this business. How are you balancing that family life with, building a business that I'm sure is all consuming?
Yeah. So first off, very blessed. I have a loving wife, and we now have a 1.5-year-old baby, which is great. I think, I mean, I don't know any different. We had the company when we had the baby. Literally, I was working in the delivery room. So part of it is, again, having a wife that's super supportive. I actually wrote about her and on LinkedIn, and I just said, without her, this company wouldn't exist, and I think that's actually very true. So I think in some ways it's good because if I want to, I can work from home, and be there for my daughter and my wife. But on the other hand, the level of things coming at you is extreme, and so either you're fundraising, you're selling, you're dealing with like your team. There's always something happening, so it is very all encompassing. I guess you just have to kind of work harder. You wake up earlier, you just work harder, you work on the weekends, but you try to make it all work. So yeah, there's a lot of spinning plates constantly.
Certainly keeping you busy, especially with a 18-month-old, keeping you on your toes. I'm sure she
Yeah.
keeps you grounded as well.
Yeah. It's funny, sometimes when, we're all human and there's days where you just don't want to get out of bed and you're like, nope, I have to because there's people counting on me. So it's a good motivator in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go back a little bit to the previous companies that you've kind of founded. I want to talk a little bit about the Dazzle Me business that you worked on. You worked on that business, and that was seemingly a really successful business that you kind of worked on for a few years. Tell me a little bit about your time as a founder then versus today.
That's so interesting. I think that was kind of one of the first companies that I started where people were paying us and things were happening. Money was being exchanged. It moved beyond the sketchbook and kind of into a place where there was employees, there was revenue, there was like real like things happening. It was also at a point in my life where I just didn't quite have the knowledge or the skills, like how to get to that next level. And nowadays, I meet with so many founders that are, really skilled, really smart, but just, don't know necessarily how to get to that next level. And I think that's kind of where we hit, where we had some really great product market fit. We had like a pretty loyal user base. But in order to get it from where it was to whatever, choose your number, $1 billion company, I just wasn't sure how to do that. And so I think the difference between today and then, and don't get me wrong, like I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything, but I've been around the block enough times. And I think listening to podcasts like yours, I've learned from other people where I think that even if I went back in time to run that company, I actually think that company could be much bigger than it became. And I think that I'm taking all those wins and losses and skills, bringing it to bear with Uniblock, and I have a really good feeling that we're kind of onto something special here.
I think that's such a great attitude to have, no regrets. But of course, if you were to go back in time, things would be different. What would you actually change if you could go back in time now and do differently there?
So I think there's a few things to point out. One is that I had just kind of finished school and I was saddled with a decent amount of debt. I'm watching all of my friends buy cars and rent places, and I'm sleeping in my like bunk bed from, when I was a kid back moving in with my parents. And so I remember another thing, like, I've got my credit cards are maxed out. I went on a date with this one woman and she orders an expensive glass of wine. And I'm thinking if she orders a second glass of wine, like my visa is gonna like not like I can't pay for this dinner. So there's a decent amount of sacrifice. I think like probably if I could go back, I would probably try to, raise money in a more thoughtful way. And probably literally just buy a plane ticket to San Francisco and try to, raise money there, make connections there, kind of build it there. Because I think again, kind of what we're doing and the time and place was all great, but I didn't have the wherewithal to kind of do that. And I don't know if things have changed. Maybe, since I did that, that's just more in the meta. Like people are on Twitter, X, like, and they see kind of like, oh, you go to SF and this is how it works. But that wasn't on my mind right now. I think like if I had just bought a one-way ticket, it probably would have built like a pretty successful company.
Interesting. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your funding journey, in terms of, what did that look like? You make it sound like it was really easy, people just giving you money, but I'm sure it wasn't the case.
No, it's the opposite. So I do also write, and I'm not trying not to pitch my LinkedIn, but I do write about this on LinkedIn a little bit, where actually the raising the money was very hard. So the first like pre-seed, that took me several months. I had probably 50 pitches before the first VC said yes. So it was actually pretty stressful. And while you're getting no's or you're getting ghosted or you're getting like a maybe with no commit, you start to wonder like, do I actually have this? Like, can I do this? And so in the first several, you're messing them up because your pitch is bad. You don't have the right answers. Maybe your data room is like wonky. So the first pre-seed took several months. But I ended up raising 2.3 million, which was great. There's a couple of call outs. Yeah, one call out is that I had, now at that point, I'm an investor in some funds. I know a decent amount of VCs. A reasonable amount of angels, like my friends, were like, hey, I'd like to give you some money. And I said, not until I raise our first million. Once you raise $1 million, I'll take your money, but your friendship and relationship is more important than the cash. And I know that's not where everybody's in a position to do, but that's one thing that I did and I think is interesting when I talk to people. And the second thing is, so at the time, we had kind of a team. We had a small team working with us, and they kind of knew like things were kind of off with the fundraise and kind of what was going on. And so got the first check in the mail, like first yes. And I remember calling all the team and I'm like, okay, we got our first yes. It's about $150,000. This gives us 4.5 months of runway. If you stick with us and, keep going, trust me, I won't give up and I'll keep raising. And that was actually true. And nobody left the company. So I think like one other kind of side note to that is I'm always struggling with giving people visibility and treating them like, partners and, adults, but also you don't want to give them all the stress in the world because they have, rent they have to pay. So if you're taking your stress and giving it to them, it's unfair. But anyway, I was transparent and said, hey, we've got 4.5 months and we ended up raising 2.3 and kicked off our other fundraise, our seed round a few months ago and just announced that raise. So in total, we've raised 7.5 million, which is great.
Congratulations. That's a lot of work just to raise that in itself. But yeah, absolutely. I think it's challenging keeping the team motivated and not giving them too much of the truth of everything that's going on, but at the same time trusting them. And they in turn trust you as well, which is great. I think we talk a lot about investor relations. And, often I think founders have this view of, I'll take the money where I can get it. Did you feel that you were in a position where you could almost, create a two-way street in the fundraising process where you were equally vetting the investors to make sure that they were a good fit for Uniblock?
Yes, to a certain degree, yes. There were a couple of investors that wanted terms that just wouldn't make sense for us or wanted something that we just couldn't accommodate. And that happened, a couple of times where we just walked away from the money. So I think that, there is a point where you say, well, if I don't take the money, we're going to die anyways. So I might as well take the money. And I think that's like a fair assessment of the world. But I think at the other hand, if you do take it and it's like a ticking time bomb because there's something in that side letter or in their terms that are going to kind of blow up in your face, you're kind of just kicking the can down the road. So yeah, there were definitely a couple of VCs that had given us a kind of weird terms that are not on the cap table. I just walked away.
Yeah, that's a great place to be, and very trusting of you that you would know that the right people would come along at the right time.
I mean, so I had some great advice when we were doing our pre-seed, when I had that moment of like, can I actually do this? A friend of mine said, well, the nice thing is there's really unlimited pre-seed and seed investors. It's true. There are quite literally hundreds of thousands of people that can write you a $50,000 check. So the reality is you're going to run out of days of the year or energy before you're going to run out of VCs. So as long as you're willing to keep going and the business can keep running and you're willing to do double duty of, selling and building and raising, you will raise money and you can keep going. So sometimes it's nice to be pragmatic about it.
Absolutely. So aside from the fundraising, what's been the biggest challenge with this company that you're building right now for you personally?
I think personally the challenge, and again I kind of alluded to earlier, was the third piece, which was the family and just being in mental and financial position. I think the answer is that going on this mission when I did put a lot of stress on my wife and the family that maybe I hadn't necessarily appreciated. I don't know that I really realized. In fact, I know that I didn't fully realize just how much I expected of her. So that's one thing that, when you're with somebody and people are relying on you, that invariably some of your stress and some of your burden goes to them. And so that's definitely something personally that I, find difficult. I will say that, now like every week, every day, every month, whatever, gets a little better, but definitely my wife is like essentially a co-founder in this whole thing.
Absolutely. And what would you say has been the most surprising part of your journey so far?
I think that the surprising part is probably where you, on the outside of all these big announcements, like a raise announcement or a big sale announcement, or you think that there is some sort of like moment of, there's like a ticker tape parade and everybody's excited. But to be honest with you, there's just so much coming all the time that, we closed the round. There wasn't really any celebration. We didn't really take that moment. We just moved right into the next thing. So yeah, I guess like that's probably one piece of it where it's just constant. There's not really like, oh, hey, like we hit this amazing thing. Let's go spend like, a week partying like that. We don't even spend 5 minutes. It's I guess that's just the way it is. You just kind of roll right into the next thing to do.
And what's your and your co-founder's long-term vision for the business?
I think that we are in this extremely blessed opportunity where we have the right team, we have the money, we have the product, and we're in an industry that is still early enough that there's no winners and losers yet. And there's just so many people coming into this space that, being the right product, the right time, if we were, 2 years early or 2 years later, perhaps, you're too early and you run out of money, or you're too late and there's just no opportunity. I think all the Goldilocks, is starting to kind of come together. So if we can kind of just keep this intensity and keep rolling out, I feel like we have an opportunity to be a fairly large player and kind of like, people say this, but I can imagine us being like an AWS for crypto, to be this place where everybody comes and can just get access to everything. And when I say crypto, I should actually say fintech, because we're adding in things like stocks and things like Forex and like all these other things. So I feel like we have this opportunity to hub for kind of everything, which is exciting.
Really exciting. So specifically for the next 12 months, what do you hope to happen?
So we announced our raise about 2 weeks ago, and we have some big goals from a product delivery perspective, a sales perspective, a partnership perspective. And so I'd love over the next pretty much the next like 12 months, but 2026 to kind of hit those kind of goals. And so yeah, I think an increase in sales, obviously more products and services, and just a stronger offering, and then getting some really nice partners on the table so that we can kind of like level up. But yeah, that's pretty much kind of the main things. And I don't know if that's that much different than a year ago or the next year, but sell more stuff, build more stuff, partner for more stuff.
That sounds like some good goals to me. Given that you are a serial entrepreneur and you've done this quite a few times in different shapes and forms, what advice would you give to new founders starting out today or considering building their own startup?
I think there's a few things. I think one is that, again, make sure that it's the people, the general idea, and that you are ready to kind of do this and go to war for a while. I think that's the three things that are important. I think some of the advice, like I've said earlier, is that you can raise money. If you actually say that you want to raise money, and you go and kind of follow all the tips of getting the right deck and the right general idea, and you're willing to go and have 100 VC pitches, you will pretty much undoubtedly raise a round. I think a lot of all of these things, though, comes down to really just like how much punishment you're willing to put yourself through, like how much pain you're willing to endure. As long as you're willing to endure an extreme amount of pain, you'll be able to, I think, build a business. I think that part gets romanticized out of most of what we see. But the reality is, if you're willing to just, eat the suck more than the next guy, you will most likely be able to kind of build something, somewhat successful.
Absolutely. Instagram versus reality, huh?
Yes.
So, Kevin, for those listening, I know that you're pretty active on LinkedIn, so would highly recommend anyone interested to follow you on LinkedIn. Are you still active on Twitter or X?
I am, yeah, I am, and I'm trying to comment more on the life of being a founder. For better, for worse, I find myself getting pulled into, political discourse, and there's nothing I can do about it. And it's exciting, but I just have to like pause. But yes, I do talk a lot on X about being a founder and life as a startup person.
Fantastic. And we'd love to have you on the show again in 12 months' time to discuss how your year has been. Will you come back and join us again?
Oh, I'd love it. It's been great talking to you both like on camera and previous. So yeah, I would love to talk to you anytime.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's it for this episode of Tech Startup Stories. Have a story you'd like us to share or a topic you'd want to cover? Reach out and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.